6 p.m. and this is CBX Business News. The business news headlines are brought to you by QMax Wealth Management, making more possible. A return to profitability. The Caribbean's fight for investment and business capital targets land restoration. Good evening and welcome to CBX Business News for Monday, August 17, 2026. I'm Rashel Moncrieffe. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, Mayberry Group swings back into quarterly profit, reporting more than $188 million in earnings attributable to shareholders for Q2. Also ahead, the European Union says the Caribbean must compete more aggressively for global capital as the race for international investment intensifies. And later, the UNCCD wants businesses and investors to put more capital into land restoration, arguing that healthy land must become an economic priority. Stay with us as we unpack these stories and more right after the break.
So how is it possible that this fellow now can be writing a check to buy the National Commercial Bank of Jamaica? I couldn't get a job. Having sent out 100 resumes for job applications, I got 100 rejections. I committed to dedicating NCB to building a better Jamaica. You also have to be prepared to suffer the consequences of being different.
The local news is brought to you by Derrimon Trading, better from the start. The Development Bank of Jamaica, facilitating economic growth and development. Caribbean Flavors and Fragrances, Tease the Senses, and Pulse Investments. Welcome back to CBX Business News. We begin with a major turnaround for one of Jamaica's leading investment groups. After spending the first 3 months of the year deep in the red, Mayberry Group Limited has returned to profitability as a recovery across its investment portfolio helped reverse the heavy losses recorded a year ago. Presenting the results last Friday, Mayberry's Senior Vice President of Investment Banking, Dan Theok, says the group closed the second quarter with a profit attributable to shareholders of over $188 million when compared with a loss of more than $1 billion in the same period last year.
Q2 and Q2 itself, the net profit attributable to shareholders was $188.4 million. A substantial improvement over the $1.1 billion loss for Q2 last year. This translates into an EPS of 16 cents. This gain is fundamentally driven by the large unrealized gains in the fair value of associates and other investments, which we'll go into as we go along.
Mayberry's recovery, however, has not yet erased the damage from the start of the year. The group remained in the red for the 6 months to June.
For the first half of the year, though, we still have a loss of $983 million because we had a $1.2 billion loss in Q1, and we've now clawed back quite a bit of that in Q2, but still having an overall loss. And we'll talk about the pipeline of activities and what's happening for the rest of the year.
That was Mayberry's Senior Vice President of Investment Banking, Dan Theok. NCB Financial Group, NCBFG, says its underlying earnings are becoming more consistent as the financial conglomerate moves away from reliance on one-off gains and towards a stronger base of recurring income. At the company's Q3 investor briefing on Friday, Group Chief Executive Officer Robert Almeida says the company is now generating a core recurring earnings run rate of between $5 and $6 billion per quarter.
Our underlying earnings are becoming more predictable, with a core recurring earnings profile now emerging in the region of $5 to $6 billion per quarter. There will always be volatility. Markets will move and unexpected events will occur. But what investors should increasingly be able to see through that volatility is the underlying earnings power of the group.
Almeida says the shift towards more predictable earnings is being supported by greater operating efficiency.
We are also making progress on efficiency. Our cost-to-income ratio continues to improve, although it remains above our target of approximately 60%. Return on equity has strengthened, although it remains below our 15% hurdle. So while we recognize the progress, there is more work to do. It is also important to look at these metrics on a meaningful underlying basis. Excluding the prior year gain on disposal of the subsidiary, return on equity, return on assets, and cost-to-income ratio would have been 7.09, 0.87, and 72.84%, respectively, in the prior year. Against that base, our current year-to-date ratios are tracking ahead, or favorably compared to the prior year.
That was NCBFG CEO Robert Almeida. Staying in financial news, Dollar Financial Services is ramping up lending in the third quarter as stronger customer demand helps the microfinance company put more of its available cash to work. The company ended June with a sizable cash position, partly reflecting funds raised to support the expansion of its loan portfolio. Chief Financial Officer Trevine McKenzie says while Dollar's cash position has since come down following dividend and interest payments, the company's summer promotion is driving stronger loan activity.
We are seeing an uptick in cash when we compare to where we were last year. But I just want to make it clear, we're looking at about $600 million as at the end of June. Since then, we have paid out dividends to the tune of about $92 million. And we have also paid out interest expense to the tune of about $100 million, give or take. So if we look at where we are today, we're much closer to about $350 to $400 million in terms of cash on hand at the moment. And what we're looking at presently is that our summer promotion has really kicked off very big for the summer. That has increased our sales significantly. So we're expecting that cash to really be deployed within the next month, 2 months, 1 to 2 months.
That was Dollar Financial Services CFO Trevine McKenzie. And finally, Caribbean Cement Company is looking to regional exports as a new source of revenue as competition in Jamaica's cement market is expected to intensify. Managing Director Jorge Martinez says additional cement import licenses have been granted, which could bring more competition into the local market during the second half of the year.
The market dynamic will be more competitive, for sure. There will be more competitive because I mentioned already that there are some specific licenses that have been granted. So we expect some additional competition coming from there. So, but at the end, what we're expecting is to continue delivering in the same way. In case that we have some surpluses, again, coming from local demand being attended, those surpluses will be dedicated immediately to export to get an additional source of revenue from exports that we haven't had during the first half.
Despite expecting a more challenging second half, Martinez says the company remains on track to end 2026 with growth over last year.
Yes, will be challenging the second half, but at the end, what I can tell you and what I can expect for the second half is that at the end of the year, we will continue adding value in the way that if we compare 2026, the end of 2026 compared with 2025, I see that same story of growing happening back again.
That was Caribbean Cement Company's Managing Director Jorge Martinez. We move to the latest updates from the JSE Equities. In Monday's trading session, the JSE market activity resulted in the trading of 120 stocks, of which 44 advanced, 58 declined, and 18 traded firm. Leading the winners are Berger Paints Jamaica, Mayberry Group, Kingston Properties, and Regency Petroleum Company, while leading the losers are One-on-One Educational Services, Everything Fresh, Margaritaville Turks, and Innovative Energy Group. The main index advanced by 9.75 points to close at 373,264.92 points. The junior market index declined by 28.23 points to close at 2,909.61 points. It's time for the Market Education feature, brought to you by CARICRIS, Regional Ratings, Global Standards. In today's Market Education feature, we're talking about a unilateral contract. A unilateral contract is an agreement where one party makes a promise in exchange for another party completing a specific action. Unlike a traditional contract involving promises from both sides, the other party is not obligated to act. A common example is a reward offer, where payment is promised only if someone performs the requested action. For a unilateral contract to be legally binding, it generally requires clear terms, something of value, an intention to create a legal agreement, and completion of the required action. That was the Market Education feature, brought to you by CARICRIS, Regional Ratings, Global Standards. And that's it for the local news segment. Please stay with us. The regional news is up next. The local news is brought to you by Derrimon Trading, better from the start. The Development Bank of Jamaica, facilitating economic growth and development. Caribbean Flavors and Fragrances, Tease the Senses, and Pulse Investments. Welcome back. And now for the regional business news. The Caribbean is being urged to position itself more aggressively for international investment as competition for global capital intensifies. Speaking at the official launch of the Caribbean Investment Forum 2026 in Barbados recently, European Union Ambassador to Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, Her Excellency Fiona Ramsey, says geopolitical tensions and global uncertainty are changing the investment landscape.
Amid rising tensions in the world, not least the crisis in Iran and the impact that it has on fuel, for example, we also see that total capital flows are slowing down globally, and high interest rates have resulted in capital becoming scarcer. Supply chains have been continuing to evolve, but in many cases they've become further fragmented. Alongside these geopolitical realities and digital technologies are effectively reshaping multiple industries across the world. And I think in that context of uncertainty, investors, governments, partners are looking for reliable investment partners.
However, Ramsey notes the Caribbean has an advantage through its access to the European market.
I think this is partly due to the uncertainty in international markets, and I think the Caribbean offers predictability and openness, and I would like to emphasize that. And that's also something that's very much key to our European Union-Caribbean trade agreement and trade partnership. We have a trade agreement that dates since 2008, so duty-free, quota-free access to the EU for all goods produced across the Caribbean, allowing them to reach potentially 450 million consumers across our 27 member states. And the predictability and the openness of that relationship is also key to our business and trade flows.
That was European Union Ambassador to Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, Her Excellency Fiona Ramsey. The Caribbean Investment Forum will be held in Barbados from October 5 to 7 this year. St. Kitts and Nevis is turning to Ghana to recruit nurses to help address staffing shortages in the Federation's healthcare system. Prime Minister Dr. Terence Drew says existing staffing shortages have placed additional pressure on nurses and affected the level of care they are able to provide. He says recruiting nurses from Ghana is intended to ease the strain on the existing workforce.
Recognizing that over the time and understanding what can have that ratio that ensure that our patients are properly taken care of. When you don't have the expertise in training so that our patients can benefit, that drove me to ensure. And I said to the PNO and all of them, we will end the shortage of nurses once and for all. And so today, you are here fulfilling that and helping us to end that. Therefore, for even our nurses who are here, going from a ratio of 1 to 7 to a ratio of 1 to 4 means less strain, less stress, less frustration.
Dr. Drew says improving staffing will ultimately increase the workforce while improving the quality of healthcare delivered to patients.
It means you can really deliver the care that you were trained to deliver. It means you can be empathetic, sit at the bedside, sit with a family, and deliver all that you're supposed to. In addition to that, the ratio of errors will drop significantly, which means patient outcome will improve. That is what this program will deliver. Our professionals from Ghana, let us welcome them not only as nurses, but let us welcome them petition care. Let us show them who we are as a people. We are welcoming people, and so we will welcome you with open arms.
That was Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, Dr. Terence Drew. In financial news, shareholders of Trinidad and Tobago NGL Limited have opted overwhelmingly for US dollars in a special dividend payout as the company reports stronger first half earnings. Investors holding 81% of issued shares elected to receive the special dividend in US currency, resulting in a payout of $18.5 million. The distribution followed shareholder approval of a $2.2 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollar reduction in stated capital. The payout comes as TTNGL reports improved underlying performance for the first half of 2026. After-tax profit reached 62.9 million Trinidad and Tobago dollars, up 27.6% from the adjusted result for the corresponding period last year. The company attributed the improvement mainly to stronger performance at Phoenix Park gas processors, supported by higher natural gas liquids content, stronger prices, and lower feedstock costs. TTNGL expects gas supply conditions to improve into 2027, supported by additional upstream volumes, new domestic production, expansion projects, and cross-border gas developments. However, the company says margins in its North American operations could face pressure as contracts are renewed. It's now time for news from the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange. Overall market activity resulted from trading in 23 securities, of which 7 advanced, 7 declined, and 9 traded firm. Leading today's winners are Prestige Holdings, National Enterprises, Point Listas Industrial Port Development Corporation, and National Flour Mills. While leading the losers are the West Indian Tobacco Company, Unilever Caribbean, Guardian Media, and Agostini Limited. Trading activity resulted in the following movements. The All TNT Index declined by 1.59 points to close at 1,436.14. The Composite Index also declined, but by 0.62 points to close at 1,014.66. However, the Cross-Listed Index advanced by 0.06 points to close at 79.01, while the SME Index remained at 71.22. And we take a short break, but please do stay with us. The international news segment is up next.
It's feeling so good right now. Feeling so good right now. Yeah, yeah. It's feeling so good right now. Feeling so good right now. Yeah, yeah. It's feeling so good right now. Don't never, ever, ever wanna calm down. No, no, no. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Welcome back. In international news, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD, is pushing for greater private sector investment in land restoration, arguing that degraded land must increasingly be treated as an economic risk. Speaking at the opening press conference of UNCCD COP17 in Ulaanbaatar, Saudi Arabia's Deputy Minister for Environment, Dr. Osama Ibrahim Faqih, says more than $12 billion announced at COP16 marked an important step in mobilizing financing. He says the broader objective is to bring businesses and investors more directly into efforts to restore degraded land.
First of all, that announcement, 12 billion, came from the private sector mainly. So this is very important that the private sector should be part of the solution because, as you know, the agriculture, the business, the food security, the building material, the mining, the fashion industry, they are all depends on land. And they contribute those businesses who does not practice good practices will contribute to degradation. So the important achievement, in my opinion, is not only the amount of money, but the beginning of changing of attitude of the business community to be on board.
He also highlighted the Business for Land initiative as an important mechanism for changing how companies approach land management. The UNCCD also notes up to 40% of the world's land is already degraded, threatening economic sectors that depend on healthy land and ecosystems.
And second, also, I think as important as the financial announcement is the Business for Land initiative. I think now we have 300 businesses or so globally. So we have some of the global fashion industry companies, global food security, food companies, and global agriculture companies, and others coming really to be on board, because still now the about 55% of the global GDP depends on the natural capital. And this, by the way, few years ago, it was about 85%. Now, because of the information technology and a lot of services that are being done, IT services, that is growing in financial dimension, that decrease. But still, we rely on the natural capital, and especially the land, as to support us in many things.
That was Deputy Minister for Environment at the Ministry of Environment of Saudi Arabia, Dr. Osama Ibrahim Faqih. Turning to Asia, India's labor market strengthened in July, with unemployment falling to its lowest level in 4 months, even as more people entered the workforce. The unemployment rate declined to 5.1% from 5.5% in June, despite continued pressure from elevated energy prices and weakness in the rupee. The improvement was concentrated in rural areas, where unemployment fell to 4.5%. Urban unemployment edged higher to 6.7%. Importantly, the decline came alongside stronger labor force participation, which increased by a full percentage point to 55.4%. The employment rate also climbed to 52.5%, indicating the lower unemployment rate was accompanied by stronger employment rather than workers simply leaving the labor force. Moving to North America, foreign investors sharply increased their exposure to Canadian securities in June, with purchases surging to 40.8 billion Canadian dollars from 8.8 billion in May. Debt securities attracted nearly all of the new investment, accounting for $39.9 billion. Federal government debt led the increase, drawing $25.4 billion from non-resident investors. Foreign investors also purchased $16.2 billion in private corporate bonds, largely issued by Canadian banks in US dollars and euros. Canadian equities returned to positive territory, attracting $901 million after foreign investors sold $16.1 billion worth in May. By sector, investors increased their holdings of manufacturing shares while reducing exposure to trade and transportation, as well as finance and insurance. For the second quarter overall, foreign purchases of Canadian securities reached a record 100.6 billion Canadian dollars. And that's it for the international segment of the newscast. The news recap is coming up on the other side of the break. And now to recap our top stories. In the local news, Mayberry Group returns to profitability with $188 million Q2 profit. Regionally, EU urges the Caribbean to compete more aggressively for global investment. And internationally, UNCCD pushes business investment to make land restoration profitable. Those were the stories making today's CBX Evening News. On behalf of the entire production team, I'm Rashel Moncrieffe. Thanks for watching CBX, your region, your business, your source.
Melissa Kidd, Director at BRK Limited.